what explains why our Afghan allies, as valued and high priority as they are to us, why Afghans who had this special visa category created for them because they worked with U.S. troops, they worked with the U.S. government, they worked as part of the security mission in Afghanistan, they helped our forces there. Why can't they get their visa applications processed? Why is that process so broken and under-resourced? Why does it take so long? Here's Olivia Troy earlier today. Quote, I met with numerous external organizations during my White House tenure who advocated for refugees and pleaded for help in getting U.S. allies through the process. I got the phone calls and letters as the Homeland Security and Counterterrorism Advisor to Vice President Mike Pence. She said, quote, the system wouldn't budge, regardless of how much this was argued about in National Security Council meetings. The Pentagon weighed in, saying we needed to get these allies through the process. Mattis and others sent memos. Now, that's checkable, actually, and we checked, and she is right about that. Here's Defense Secretary Jim Mattis's memo in September 2018 telling the administration, advising the administration as Secretary of Defense, do not limit the numbers of people you're going to let in. We need to protect and prioritize these Iraqis and Afghans who aligned with our diplomats and warfighters by providing essential mission support. Olivia Troy today saying, quote, Mattis and others sent memos. We all knew the urgency, but the resources had been depleted. Well, what does that mean? Why were the resources depleted? Well, she has the story. She was there. She says, quote, there were cabinet meetings about this during the Trump administration where Stephen Miller would peddle his racist hysteria about Iraq and Afghanistan. He and his enablers across government would undermine anyone who worked on solving the SIV issue, the special immigrant visa issue, by devastating the system at Homeland Security and state. She says, quote, I tracked this issue personally in my role during my White House tenure. We got nowhere on it because Trump and Stephen Miller had had watchdogs in place at the Justice Department and Homeland Security, at state and security agencies that made the already cumbersome SIV process even more challenging. Quote, the fear of people across the Trump administration to counter these enablers was palpable. There were numerous behind closed door meetings strategizing about how to navigate this issue. She says, quote, Trump had 4 years while putting this plan in place to evacuate these Afghan allies who were the lifelines for many of us who spent time in Afghanistan. They'd been waiting a long time. The process slowed to a trickle for reviews, other priorities. Then it came to a halt. Now, to be clear, what Olivia Troy is saying here is that for the Afghans who helped U.S. troops and U.S. forces in Afghanistan, who are now getting so much attention, right? For all the right reasons. These are Afghan allies of our forces. They are supposed to be able to get visas to come here with their families in thanks for what they did for our country. A special visa category was created for them for just that purpose. She's saying, yes, that process of getting that visa was already cumbersome. But she's saying under the Trump administration, while they were making overt plans to end the war in Afghanistan and bring all U.S. troops home from Afghanistan, like Trump was bragging about, right? While Trump was bragging that, yes, certainly he'd bring home all the troops, and yes, certainly the Afghan government would collapse as soon as he did that, but he wanted all the troops out anyway, so that's what he was setting in motion in a way that couldn't be reversed by anyone. While they were setting all that in motion during the Trump administration, they were also simultaneously deliberately sabotaging the process. What did she say? She called it devastating the system at Homeland Security and the State Department on purpose, so that those visas for our Afghan allies would get stuck in the system forever, so those Afghan allies wouldn't be able to get out, as they were planning to take out all U.S. troops, whereupon they knew the Afghan government would collapse. They deliberately sabotaged the process to make sure those Afghan visas would not be processed in any timely manner. Elizabeth Newman was a senior Homeland Security official under Trump. She today publicly confirmed Olivia Troy's account of how this happened inside the Trump administration. The Trump administration at the highest levels deliberately sabotaging the visa process for these Afghan allies, which is why so many of them have been stuck all of this time. And, you know, some of this has been hiding in plain sight. In 2019, a federal judge ruled that the Trump administration actually broke the law by radically dragging out the process of administering these visas and refusing to give answers to Afghans and even members of Congress who were inquiring on behalf of Afghans who had worked with U.S. troops and who had applied for these special visas. A federal judge ruled that they broke the law by breaking the system so that these visas would never get processed. It was hiding in plain sight that the system was broken under the Trump administration. But still, it is another thing altogether to have senior officials from inside that administration say, yeah, that process was broken. It was broken deliberately in order to strand the Afghans who helped us. Joining us now is Olivia Troy, who served in the White House as a top advisor to Vice President Mike Pence.
Watching what's happening here and watching, President Biden work now very hard to rescue a lot of these people while we still can, I just think about the thousands of people that were in this pipeline for several years who should have been processed, who should have gone through this pipeline. And I'm talking about Afghans, and I'm talking about Iraqis too, right? We saw the withdrawal from Syria where we know, and like my colleague Elizabeth Newman knows this, we think about this and we talk about it all the time. It's, many of these people did not make it out alive, and they were our allies there. And so watching this has been incredibly angering and frustrating for me, because for 4 years, this administration under Trump, they did nothing, and they decimated the process, like they destroyed it. And it was very challenging for those of us working on these issues to really push the needle forward or get anything done. And look, I know Mike Pence knows this. He knows that this fell under my portfolio. He knows I followed up on it diligently. He would call me to check on some of the applicants' visas and find out what the process was. But it was a well-known thing that Stephen Miller allies were across the interagency. We had to meet with them. They were heads of offices. They were installed on purpose. Some of these loyalists eventually were installed in the NSC, where other public servants, career servants who were dedicated to trying to figure this process out were then removed from the roles and replaced with loyalists who only made this process harder.